I want to welcome everybody, and a good morning to all of you. If you're on the coast, that is. The rest of you, good afternoon. I want to talk about a topic that I think has been getting increased attention, partly as a result of the recent affiliation agreement that's in place between SAA and NCJA. And that affiliation not only involves partnering and sharing of resources of actual home offices of those agencies, but is also intended as a springboard for enhancing the coordination and collaboration with those folks at the SAA that are doing development and program monitoring at the SACs that provide research support. And I think at the current time, approximately 2/3 of the SACs are situated within SAAs, which certainly would facilitate this type of a partnership. But I also have to say that if your SAC is located in a different parent organization, it shouldn't keep you from seeing out that type of a working relationship. I believe this type of program support is really the most important task that we have for us, to be able to ensure that we are creating programs and establishing accountability measures to make sure that we're investing well. Most of the support activities that I'm going to talk about do not require large numbers of SAC staff, and most do not require early technical skills. I'm well aware the SACs vary in size quite a bit. We're fortunate here to have about 14 or 15 folks, and I know that some of the SACs are operating with 1 or 2 folks, and what I'd like to do is to offer a range of activities that SACs can undertake to help support program development and assessment, and think of those things as kind of a smorgasbord from which you can choose the activities that are realistic given what your staffing limitations are. The process has really been evolving over the past 4 or 5 years. I think it began in earnest when we started really looking at the Recovery Act programs and trying to determine where evaluation work might be needed. And as we looked at the proposals that were coming in and thinking about how are we going to collect the right kinds of information to be able to assess these programs, realized that we needed to really get involved in the program development process at a much earlier stage. Independent of the Recovery Act, we were getting called in to help with developing data reports or analyzing existing grant data reports. We found that being collected was all wrong. All looked kind of the same and didn't really tell us about meaningful performance indicators. So we determined at that point that the role of the SAC really should interact with different points the life cycle of grants administration illustrated in this particular graphic. And that begins at an even earlier stage than attention to an individual specific grant proposal. We're looking broadly, strategically planning how we may want to spend the various federal funds. So what I mean when I'm talking about an earlier involvement, we assisted in this regard in Illinois as it pertains to JAG planning, but I think some of the most investing in extensive work that we've done in informing level programming efforts has to do with the VOCA and VAWA funds. Have assembled a group of experts and practitioners in the victim services field on nearly a yearly basis, try to plan how those dollars are spent, and we're able to provide, I think, some meaningful support for that. So this about as generally can condense the type of support that we provide in these kinds of efforts is analyzing the existing program data, informing the service gaps, identify where funding is needed, and helping to also some of these programs by seeking out the evidence on what really works in some of these areas. For data, our starting point, the basic summaries of activity in program areas, looking at what's been done over the previous year or so. Last year's planning sessions, we looked at 2012 data and to get just a broad picture of the types of clients that are being served by the broad crime type categories of VAWA. And when you look at this, we can please see that for VOCA, more than half of the clients served are DV victims. Data at the client level kind of also summarize the activity at the program level as well. I think both levels of analysis are important. Here we're looking at the number of programs funded by a specific victimization categories. Again, when you look over on the left-hand side, a lot of the money for VOCA is going into areas that could, in some cases, be from VAWA as well, the child sex abuse and adult sex abuse. The great number of programs that were funded were in the domestic violence area. Important to look at changes over time. We're trying to inform stakeholders about what changes took place in the previous 3 fund years in clients served generally by VOCA and VAWA, by the VAWA transitional housing grants. By discussing this in an open forum with practitioners, with program administrators, we are able to introduce information that they can help us to interpret, figure out what it means. So what's significance to the fact that the number of program clients for VAWA, D and otherwise, has gone up excessively in the past 2 years, whereas the numbers have gone down. Looked at the transitional housing program. And as I'll show you with some of the other data that we introduced, we're hoping to shed some light on what some of these trends actually mean. Did the same with the sexual violence program data as well. Where programming needed? Our decision points. We need to look at official statistics to frame discussion. We're moving beyond the program data, trying to find something that we believe is a reliable indicator of the problem itself. So in our case, we'll start off looking at our domestic violence offenses that have been reported by police to the UCR program. And we start off graphically looking at regions and try to then whittle down the county level and wherever possible to the community level when that data is available. And I want you to note that it's important to look at both numbers and the rates. the numbers are going to tell you where the volume particular problem is taking place, but in terms of being able to do comparisons in regions, it's important that we level the playing field a little bit by considering the seriousness of the problem given what their population is, hence the need for rates. To look at multiple sources of data wherever possible, especially in the fact that it's good to look at various indicators of a particular problem, but it's also a recognition of the fact that some data sources have their own deficiencies, and we're very front with our policymakers and our committee members in explaining to them what some of those issues are. We talked about the previous data set for domestic violence offenses to UCR. The fact is that it's a voluntary reporting process in our UCR system, and where some non-reporting that may bias that information. We have here are the orders of protection, and we're looking at trend lines, bounty. And it's interesting because although the volume Cook County, Chicago, the green line responds to central Illinois. And it seems to not only have the highest rates, but experiencing the sharpest increase in years. Types of analysis for sexual assault. Here again, interestingly, we're finding central Illinois to have this rate, even though the numbers are lower than what we find in Chicago and Cook County. What we're doing is flipping back over to the client data. So we've seen where increases are taking place regionally in our indicators of domestic violence. How does that match up with where clients are being served or not served? So what we take a look at here is how are we doing in matching our DV services to those need regions. Over time, and served by region, is matching what we found before in regional need. On a broad level, the answer here is yes. The rate of clients being served by domestic service providers is the highest in Illinois, where we see the highest rates of orders of protection and of reported DV offenses. Piece, and again, we're always looking to pull in as much information as we can to help frame our understanding of the problem. And things that we get reported to us, DV programs, that are turned away from shelter care because there's no bed space. So there's one more important indicator of program need that we rely on. And it's interesting that Cook County, in terms of the raw numbers, could be known to have the highest need. But we look at trends over time. Another perspective is that we need to think about getting certain DV accommodations in place in northern counties that exclude Cook and the collar counties that surround it. Is C on the right-hand side. They've had an increase of over 1% in just a 2-year period. When presenting this information to board members and other stakeholders making this information, to try to offer as much interpretation as possible. I won't dig into the weeds too much here, but this summary, as you can offer, is helpful. The graphs and the tables can be interpreted differently by different folks, and so I try to offer summaries of what it all means when we do these presentations. So the question is, are we in alignment, match resources to fight high need areas? How do we summarize that? What attempt that we've made to try to graphically look at that match between our funding activities and our need areas. And what you'll see on the left-hand side is how our SAA attributed its VUCA and VAWA funding across the 5 regions. And on the right-hand side, how that translates into clients served. The middle 2 bars are indicators of regional differences in the extent of the problem. So when we go over on the left-hand side and that pink section down on the bottom for Cook County, single county that's getting nearly 3% of the VAWA funding, are they overfunded? Well, I think can help answer that question by looking at 2 middle bars, and they tell contrasting stories. The answer would be no. If we look at the domestic violence offenses reported, where over 60% are coming from Cook County, but a different story is told when we look at the orders of protection on bar. And helping to make these decisions, again, it helps to understand the significance of each of those data sets. And again, the major point being that researchers, we don't always have our boots on the ground in terms of understanding all those associated with these data sets. So by having the right folks in the room that are providers and practitioners and criminal justice officials, they help flesh out a better understanding of what the connection is, for example, between orders of protection issued and the incidence of domestic violence. What do we know of processes by which potential recipients of orders of protection actually receive those, and enter into this discussion. The northern region, that's that blue section, we question, are they overfunded? About 18% of the money, as seen in the first bar, but 3% of the domestic violence offenses. And this is a particular area where understanding the deficiencies comes into play because, and it's incumbent upon the SACs to have a level of understanding, otherwise they risk misleading decision makers. And in this case, the reason that that number is very low for those northern Illinois counties is the fact that the 3rd largest municipality in Illinois, which lies in that region, does not report domestic violence data. Analysis for sexual violence. Overfunded with their 34% of the sexual assault funding. One of the things that might come out of this would be some other questions. Compare downs of funding of services. Some interesting comparisons may take place as well. Analysis with child sex abuse, comparing the funding breakdown to the reported sexual abuse cases, Department of Children and Family Services. Getting a regional handle on this, it's time to start getting more precision in understanding the specific parts of the state that may be in need of programming, and turn our attention to county level analysis. And what we have here are some shaded maps that are corresponding to different volume levels for domestic violence offenses. And this is a starting point. At least get a very, very broad, generalized picture of where programming need may exist based on which areas have the highest rates of domestic violence. A starting point, there's other information that needs to be looked at. What we've done is try to overlay the indicators of domestic violence offending with an indicator of where the locations are of current domestic violence service providers. And overlaying this information, what we fact are hotspots of domestic violence programming need. Those represent areas that have relatively higher rates but have a dearth of actual programs in place. With sexual assault, start looking at locations of where programs are in existence, overlaid with grade maps, which tell us which counties have the highest areas of sexual assault. At that next stage, by looking at the hotspots, we can start to focus our attention on potential areas of need that not only have high need in terms of high offending rates, but also have the lack of programming available. And just to draw more than circles, we've got 3 spot areas for child sexual abuse. Major offense-related indicators. SACs can also be creative in terms of bringing in other types of indicators that provide program specification nuances. What do I mean by that? Well, it's one thing to know that a particular area has a rate of domestic violence and a low number of providers available. But what types of programming may be in place, and what are some of the challenges that exist? So when we bring data such as this about unemployment, there's a purpose here. The recognition that those need services and who are unemployed made it difficult to pay for or get the services they need. So how do we go about addressing that in our program? Do we set up transportation programs as a part of that? Of areas where those who do not speak English are prevalent, and those folks may have difficulty accessing services because of the language issues, and cultural differences will be a barrier to victims seeking services, where that type of response is part of the cultural norm. There's a similar concern. Those without education may find it more difficult than those with an education to take the steps necessary services when needed. In the population with a disability, I think I squeezed Illinois in a little too much on this. I don't think our state is quite that skinny, but the idea here is that the disabilities make it difficult for persons to be able to access services, so that's something we may want to take into account as well. Now, continuing on this theme of broad-level programming support, we set of data tools that some of you have seen that help assist in selection for programs. They help us to identify the underlying issues and define program activities as well. So this analysis was done, some of you have seen this, in conjunction with our in-house community-based corrections program, our alternative prison program for persons that have not been convicted of violent offenses. And what we have here, aside from the technology that's involved in producing this, is essentially a shading map that allows us to, at a glance, get a comparative look at counties are viable candidates for corrections alternatives. What we have here are rankings of the 102 counties, of which ones have the highest admission rates into our prison system. And Cook County has the highest numbers. We have a county, Richland, which is much less populated, but comes up very, very high in their rate of commitments to the Department of Corrections. And we can also take a look, very important over time, is the 1 year an anomaly, or has the problem been going up? And the answer is yes, it has been going up, fortifying the idea that they might be a candidate for that type of programming. Is that an unusual pattern for Richland County? Well, by comparing it to a benchmark, what the flat line is the rate on average for all of Illinois. We can see by comparison that rise in admissions to IDOC, that rate is atypical. It's not a pattern that we see across the entire state. Some of these tools to try to do some data mining and figure out the reasons for a high rate of admission to IDOC from that county. What possible factors that drive that? Is that this county possibly have a high felony case filing rate? We can switch our variables here and see where this county ranks in terms of their felony case filing rate, and we see that they do come up fairly high area. And without dwelling on this too much, the final analysis that we've done is try to put that information into some perspective. When we see that a particular county has a high admission rate and a high felony case filing rate, what's the normal relationship between those? We can scatter plot the information, and focusing in on this orange dot. I don't know if you're all seeing my cursor or not on your end, but we're seeing that, we'll get to a technical analysis. Richland comes up higher on our relation line, our regression line, in terms of the relationship among all counties in terms of filing rate and admission rate. Let me explain that a little bit better. Each of the dots represents a different county in Illinois, and this dot represents the intersection between their felony case filing rate on the x-axis and admissions rate to prison on the y-axis. The regression line represents the normal relationship between those variables. By Richland County coming up higher, it indicates that relative to their case filing rate, they have a high, relatively speaking, as an admission rate. So something else is going on there. And again, the idea is that we provide a series of data tools to try to flesh out what's really going on behind the numbers. And sometimes when we focus too much on rates, we lose sight of some of the importance of the raw numbers themselves. So when we look at this particular county, we see, yes, indeed, their number of admissions prison have gone up over the last 10 years. And we see that those that are going in for violent offenses is only about a third of that total. So that's good, because this particular program is nonviolent offenders. And tracing it back to arrests, we can see that although the total arrests have gone down 2,000, drug arrests are an important factor, and if we're going to structure this corrections program around drug offenders, see that they are constituting about 2/3 of our serious arrests. So we're just building a case as to why we may have a need for this particular program in Richland County. Shifting gears a little bit, I want to talk about the SAC's assistance in specific development activities. one that we found in trying to put together meaningful performance indicators and data collection forms, that the underlying program documentation was very unstructured and nebulous. And as a result, we couldn't really tell what data we were collecting. There was no systematic documentation of the link between program activities and what goals and objectives are. We went out, SAC staff helped to develop a revised template for collecting program proposal information in order to structure that information much better, to eliminate flimsy program descriptions and justifications, and really to furnish documentation that's needed to construct a logic model. And a lot of you are familiar with this term logic model. My staff are getting really sick of hearing me talk about it all the time, but it really is truly the framework that we need to pay attention to answer the question of, are we assessing programs fairly, and our program activities logically linked to what it is that they're trying to achieve. Some of you have seen diagrams of logic models. This is a generic version that they have on the OJADP website. I don't want to dwell on that too much. You've all seen different versions of this. I like this little graphic that I came across that explains it in more English language, that the idea of a logic model is using certain resources for certain program activities to produce certain outputs, so customers can change their ways, which leads to these outcomes leading to these results. And really the very best example of it, and this was also really good, this was on the OJJDP website, is a diagram that was put together by some kids trying to structure a fundraising effort, ultimately to help ensure a safe place for kids to play. The resources were their community, the surrounding communities, the activities. They sponsored a carnival, a yard sale, a car wash, a bake sale to raise $1,500 as the result. Short-term outcome, playground equipment for City Park. Goal, a safe place for kids to play. Simple and yet right to the point. I love this picture. I want to kind of go through this quickly. This is going actually taking a little more time than I thought. I should have realized this. I have a presentation that's going to go about 20 minutes, and it's overnight to hear the end of it. Only kidding. But the idea here is you can really expect program officials and community folks to have a great understanding of a logic model. How do we decipher that information in a way that it's understandable to them? So this is what went into our redesign of program narrative template. So here do we ask the kinds of grounded questions to get them to tell us what is the real problem that's being addressed, which is really the initial foundation for the program. These are the kinds of things we ask them on the template. Data that justifies the existence of the problem, quantitative or qualitative sources, any existing gaps in service related to the program to address any other resources that could be directed to this problem, why not sufficient. These are grounded questions that can be synthesized in order to produce a good logic model. In this next set of questions, we're asking about the inputs for the program, specifically the funding. The other sources of funding for this program beside what they're applying for. What have you attempted to secure for this project? How did you determine that current agency funding or other avenues couldn't support the proposed program? More detail on the program need. And here we're focusing on target area and the target population rather than the issue being addressed. asking them to identify and describe the geographical region where the program will be implemented, and to define the target population. Begin an attempt to get at a better understanding of the program activities and how they're linked to the underlying problem. Bring your attention to the first and the last bullet. They're really two sides of the same coin. Explain how the program will address the target population or identified problem, and describing how the program activities are expected to produce the desired outcomes. So we're getting them to document program activities with actual context of why are you doing these program activities. Now focusing on program activities, but in a slightly different context. Are they justifiable in investment of public funds? So when we look at these last three bullets over here, the first one, will allow them to allow if this program is an actual documented evidence-based program or promise program, but many people don't really know what that means. I'm not sure I know what that means. There's a lot of different perspectives on what it means to be an evidence-based program. So we try to decipher that a little bit here in the last three bullets to get them to tell us that they believe this is somehow a promising program, how it's appropriate to achieve your anticipated outcomes, how the program fits with your agency's work, how it best fits the needs of the community. Point that we can start bringing in some of these more traditional concepts. Now that we've given them the grounded language, now we can ask them to try to articulate goals, objectives, and performance indicators. And to help out in this, we not only give the definitions, but we provide them with a good example as well. So, some of the things that we asked for on the program proposal template aren't necessarily tied directly to the project model. Some of them have to do with other aspects of our ability to be able to track the performance of that program. It's all well and good to use these responses to structure data reports, but we need to know something about their reporting capacity. This is the start of that, us finding out what they value, decide what we value in terms of adherence to goals and objectives. If we're going to put together data reports, really hoping that they find these things useful for their own internal management purposes as well. These types of questions are intended to help them explain to us what types of data they think are important for internal purposes, how the data will be used to provide management feedback and improve the program. This one, trying to get a sense of what their management capacity is, the capability of the organization, if they play well with others. It's a new program. This is some information about startup activities that will assist us if we choose to do an implementation assessment of that program. We want them to describe what those startup activities have looked like. And finally, the challenges speaks to implementation issues for the program, but also to management capacity. If things start coming off the rails, what plans do they have to be able to do some course correction? Comes back, we're able to SAC staff do some review of that, looking whether the goals, objectives, and performance indicators seem right. The grant specialist works alongside of us, and they're the ones that facilitate all the contacts with the grantee. We do contact the grantee directly, and then we work together with grant staff to refine the grantee's goals, objectives, and performance indicators, and the data reports that can be used to measure their performance. Some very common type of review that we do We often are looking to make objectives more specific and measurable. They say we're going to provide program monitoring and oversight for all subcontractors. This is a coordinating agency that's going to coordinate violence prevention service providers in a particular Chicago neighborhood. Looking for more specificity. When we talk about objectives, we're talking about things that are measurable. 100% subcontractors will submit progress reports by a particular date. 100% will receive a site visit. 100% will submit to service and administrative records review each quarter, those types of things. This is a basis to build program reports tied to the goals and objectives. There's still some continuing negotiation that takes place, making sure that it looks realistic to the program staff, giving the grant specialist an opportunity to weigh in on what they need, guide things that are to performance goals and objectives. And the reports are designed to both collect standard information from similar projects. So the community corrections program in downstate Illinois is getting some similar standardized client characteristics as the one that's in Chicago, but it's also a balance. We're customizing it to make sure that unique program elements are captured that may be different for that particular program. Grant specialists with us, and they may talk to the grantee to answer questions, define data elements, determine whether it meets internal needs of the grantee, whether it's not overly burdensome to complete for the grantee, and there's a process now of trying to determine how to make this as easy as possible. Do they have an automated client system that may be able to facilitate reporting requirements that we have in place with them? Now, what we've done is, in some instances, actually built a level client database. Now, this slide you're looking at looks pretty lean, and the reason for that is my first thought is that what seems like a very daunting task of the client case level database may not be as difficult if you have some folks that are very fluent with Microsoft Access. The part that I didn't put in here is what I see as all reasons to think about doing this, because there's a lot of existing proprietary client-based software that's out there for various programs. Sometimes these the proprietary software developers are rigid in terms of being able to introduce certain types of data fields into these databases for clients. And, quite frankly, it seems to me that some of these relationships between the vendors and the programs almost take on sort of a predatory nature. The vendors charge for every data field. They charge for every additional report. And some of the platforms that they're built on, in my view, are really no better than Microsoft Access. So we're running short. I was going to show you an example, one that we've done, but in the interest of saving time, I'll just kind of zip through this quickly. You can take a look at this when this goes up on the JRSA website, and you're interested in replicating this type of effort, we'd be happy to help coach you through some of that. I want to conclude by just going back to basics, which is that, given the fact that there's a variance in the capacity of the different SACs, don't be discouraged if you're not able to do very high-end evaluation work. When we talk about this process, we purposefully use the term program assessment rather than evaluation. turning your attention toward this continuum at the bottom, there's a high-end assessment, which is an experimental design impact evaluation. And the truth of the matter is that most SACs do not have the capacity to do this type of work because of the technicalities and because of the amount of time and manpower that's needed to do this work. But it's a continuum of things that have great value to the SAA that don't necessarily involve that level of rigor. We spend a lot of time doing program profiles, and I'll show you a brief outline of that in a second, but there are various intermediate types of reports that are very useful to answering the questions related to whether a program has been implemented well, doing a good process or implementation evaluation. And one of the things that we're starting to look at right now, which does require more resources, but I think is very central to the value for an SAA, is cost-benefit analysis. If at the very least, though, a program profile can be used as an indicator as to whether a program is being implemented in accordance with expectations. And these are the primary elements of it. Using really the statistical information from a well-designed data report that's been put together for that grantee. And trying to at least answer this question, is the program generally meeting implementation and process objectives? Now, in terms of making this decision about how rigorous of an assessment you can carry out, how do you decide that? Is this something that you can even do in-house? Is it better contracted out? And if you're going to do it in-house, what are those criteria for determining how much rigor should go into your effort to assess the program's value? And these are some guidelines that we have. The potential magnitude of the program on criminal justice policy and practices, how core is this program, the status of the program area as a current emerging area for innovation, manageability of the evaluation, is it a single or a multiple site program requiring substantial travel and time? What's the evaluability of this program? Does it have clear goals and objectives and available data? Has it been a while since this program has been evaluated? Is there a lack of previous evaluation, even though it's been in operation for some time? Is there a potential for this program to be expanded or replicated in other jurisdictions? And of course, the funding resources expended is why we personally have sunk a lot of resources into our multi-jurisdictional drug task forces. They consume a large portion of our JAG funds. So I'm sorry if I rushed through this a little bit at the end. I wanted to keep us on the mark a little bit, but please feel free to go over any of the slides at your leisure and contact me and my staff, and I'll be happy to give you any more information that you're interested in if you to replicate any of these types of efforts.
That was really interesting and informative. I have some questions here, but before we get to those, I just wanted to see if I could, if you say that to put this into some summary and sort of perspective, you said this is a matter of figuring out what the SAA does or what decisions the SAA makes, and then the SAC trying to determine how it can help inform those decisions?
Yeah, Stan, I think it's what is driving the need for information on these programs. Thus, some of that comes from the Budget Committee, SAA Oversight Board, and again, going back to the example of the MEGs and task forces, they came to a realization 3 years ago that they had been funding them for close to 20 years and knew virtually nothing the return on investment of those programs, which is what prompted us to take on a more risk evaluation strategy of that program. I think the message that I'm trying to convey is that the notion of process and implementation evaluation, I think, has been underestimated. When we think about the role of the SAC, it's different than an academic researcher operating within a university and academic setting. We have certain responsibilities to take ownership of accountability for the programs that we fund. And for us, that means being able to furnish information to our grant staff to enhance their monitoring capacity and to be able to inform the decision makers on our oversight board.
Okay. It seems that what the SAAs do revolve around funding and funding decisions. Do you have some examples of how you've been able to impact policies or practices that are different from funding or don't relate to funding decisions?
Do analyses on programs that don't relate to, yes. And what we do is we're cognizant of the grantee as being a partner in the process. Sometimes the terminology is used differentiating between a summative and a formative evaluation. We very much lean toward the formative evaluation, and all that means is a primary objective of our evaluation efforts are not geared toward offering a thumbs up or thumbs down on funding, geared toward promoting program enhancement. And that's why it's very important when building these data reporting instruments to be able to get the input from the program administrators themselves. We're interested in collecting data that will enable them to identify program strengths and weaknesses, for example, to be able to differentiate between those program clients that they are successful with and those that they're not successful with, to be able to use that as a mechanism for mid-course correction, not necessarily to not terminate the program, but to continuously build out the program and provide this feedback mechanism to let them know what is that they're doing well and not well.
Okay, ask you, let's take a step back in a more general question. As I mentioned before, you guys have a long history of, I think, of being exemplary in many ways in terms of this question. What do you think are some of the reasons that the SAC in Illinois has been able to play, such an important role for so long with regard to the SAA and how it does its business?
Well, we have some support from the SAA. So in terms of staffing, we've been able to be fortunate enough to be recipients of some funding to actually support our activities. I think have the capacity to be able to collect data in creative ways is important. One of the challenges that we always have in Illinois are weaknesses in our criminal justice statistical systems. We do not have NIBRs. We have rather antiquated UCR. We have some major deficiencies in our court and probation and jail data sets. It forced us to try to be creative in exploiting the administrative records wherever possible. So between using history record information, statistical purposes, our corrections system data, which is the strongest of the various components in Illinois in terms of their data capacity, and information that we generate ourselves, the programs, I think is a source of strength for us. It's a matter of trying to not get bogged down with the deficiencies in your statistical data systems and try to come up with strategies around those things, and perhaps supplementing the deficiencies with things like survey information and types of environmental scans, and to see what those data indicate when combined with one another. This idea before, when we talked about it in the context of DV, being able to balance strengths of one source of data with the weaknesses of another, I think gives us more credibility when we're in a case for program need, and not trying to base it on one source that may be suspect. So that ability, and the ability to be able to report out on that information in meaningful and creative ways, I think is what our strength has been.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that I don't know how to phrase exactly, but do you think that the battle, as it were, for ability and so forth has been won a long time ago in a way, or do you still struggle to sort of promote your capability?
Always looking to promote our capability. There's certain segments of the criminal justice system that have come to rely on us more extensively than others. We have very good working relationships with many of the other state agencies, police, Department of Corrections, Administrative Office, Illinois courts. We're constantly trying to promote our credibility, not being seen as just consumers of the information, being takers, you might say, but having some sort of a value add to practitioners, policymakers, and program developers at the local level. So we're trying not to be too internalized in terms of how we use the data. Some of you have taken a look at the data tools that we've made available on the website. Those data tools are very much intended for use by a wide range of local officials. So again, we're not trying to hide any of the information we have. We're looking at ways of making data accessible, making it more understandable. We're very cognizant of trying to include information about data quality in all the access tools that we provide. And I think, have established ourselves as a clearinghouse and service center where people not only get a hold of data, but a place that they can come get a technical assistance in working with that data and understanding it better.
And do you think that that's something that happened that took a long time to do? And do you think that that's a capacity issue as well? In other words, you have to have people who have the capability to provide that support.
It helps. I mean, we are very blessed here. We have some folks here that have the technical capacity to be able to reach the data, to be able to establish its utility, making it available on these tools, being able to incorporate that in the website. So some of that, I think is related to some specialized individuals that we have at the agency that do have those skills. And I guess what I'm saying is that if you can find folks like that, sometimes they're a rare commodity in state government, but it's if you have folks that know how to work with off-the-shelf software, be able to furnish information to your constituents in ways that turn that into information and make it usable. I think some of that involves establishing forums to be able to understand what the needs of those practitioners and program developers really are, so that you're not operating blindly and making assumptions about what those data needs are without actually consulting with them. However, you can do that through open forums, through survey instruments, by inserting yourselves at the meetings of your various professional associations, chiefs, your probation officers, all those folks. It's very, very important to be able to ground all these efforts so that you're not, I hate to use the word ivory tower, but essentially operating with a blind eye toward what the real world needs are, how people use this data.
On the phone, we've put up the survey, so while you're listening to us, if you could take a few moments and complete that, we would really appreciate it. And also, I want to encourage you to keep asking your questions. Just send them to the host. Mark, what do you think, based on your experiences, what do you think SACs can do to better promote their capabilities to the SAAs?
I think a partnership, as I said earlier, that begins at a much earlier stage. We were at a point several years ago where that we were called into service at a point in the grant cycle where a lot of limitations on what it was that we could really do. The idea of talking today about our role in the planning efforts and in restructuring the program template is intended to be a statement that to really be of a strong, have a strong partnership with your grants administration staff, they have to respect you as a partner. That comes from involvement at very, very early stage of the process. When we first started this, we'd be asked for assistance after a program had been up and running for 5 years. And the challenge is now, will you help analyze this data so we can figure out if this program is doing its job or not? Or we're looking to about getting some better data from this program. It becomes more and more difficult if your insertion point in the process comes late. I think to be able to build that type of trust relationship and to establish your value, it's having involvement at these early stages to ensure, for example, that the program documentation that you're working with really has value for the SAA, that it's not sufficient about just the administrative requirements of grant administration and making sure that reports are in on time, that their paperwork is turned in on time, payments go out on time, all the technical administrative reports are on time. I think that's backwards thinking. I think that every one of us is accountable for the work that we do, and ultimately, as money gets tighter, I think we're all under a great deal of pressure to be able to have defensible methods to say that our grant investments are sound. And the only way that that can take place is having that partnership in place between the SAC and its administration's staff at a very early stage of program development. So to the extent that some of you issue your grants through the mechanism of an RFP, I would encourage you to involve the SAC at stage of an RFP. What are the elements of evidence-based program that we want to include in that RFP? And again, I'm talking from the perspective of community-based client-serving programs. I used to hear all the time that it's not necessary to be able to offer extensive guidance to local program officials on what they should do to address a particular problem, whether it's school dropouts or whether it's violence, teen pregnancy. Just give broad parameters, and local officials know their neighborhoods well enough where they know what the best fit is for their neighborhood, what the best program approach is. And I think that's wrong. Not to disrespect decision makers at the community level, I think it's incumbent upon the agency to offer more in the way of structure and give them certain choices of what evidence-based approaches are to addressing a particular problem, whether it's guns or gangs or drugs or what have you, and then work with the local constituents to determine what the best program fit is, the characteristics of their communities. And the SAC is critical to that process because the locals don't know where to get this information. It's up to us to only help them acquire it, but help instruct them on what the utility of that data is.
And do you often find yourself doing work for other request of other folks outside of the SAA legislature, for example?
Get asked for a lot of technical assistance, either acquiring data or in interpreting data, particularly with the criminal history record information, where we have a formalized role in dispensing of that for research purposes. We also have a contractual arrangement with our state advisory group that administers the Office of Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention funding. They do not have their own research staff, so they contract with us, which takes us into the area of juvenile justice research and compliance with mandates of the JDP Act. It goes us into things like measurement of disproportionate minority contact. And this is a stretch for us, and I don't know if this is realistic for the other SACs. We have been increasingly pulled into requests to assist in building databases for criminal justice purposes, and we have to be somewhat selective there in deciding whether it's something that has interest for our agency and whether we actually have the technical capacity to that. But the client database that I was briefly showing folks during this presentation has become somewhat of a type that we've been able to use as a launching point for other types of service provision programs. So we've used the same base model to build a juvenile reentry module as well. So I think, I think the more areas that you can develop these skills and capacities in, going back to your question earlier, Stan, about how is it that you gain that type of acceptance and positive acceptance by practitioners and program officials, I think more versatility that you have in the range of service you can provide, the more effective. And our strategy right now, not so much on trying to add to that menu of services, but to figure out how to better promote it. Again, our strong suit are the data tools that we've developed so that we're not just providing data on ad hoc requests. We give people the ability to be able to play with that data themselves, formulate their own analyses, formulate their own graphs and tables and maps, and finding that it's underutilized. Right now, we're trying to come up with some strategies on how to market those products and services better, and think about how it is that people actually conduct web-based searches. We used to have the false notion that people would come to our agency website first in search of those products and services, and we realize now that that's not true. That's not, if you think about how you do searches, you're going to Google, you're trying certain types of search terms, and we're now starting to make some adjustments, and we code up products and services so that they're discoverable through the web searches. So they're getting ahead of it a little bit for some folks, but again, in terms of the question you asked as far as how do you gain your foothold, a centerpiece, criminal justice data and research, I think that marketing strategy, that web-based marketing strategy, need to enter into it at some point.
What about the leadership? How important do you think it is to have the SAA director and even the folks above that person, part of them, and sort of their view of the value of research or analysis to the functioning of the SAA?
I think essential. I think we're very, very fortunate in that regard. We have an SAA director that has a high regard for the role of research in terms of shaping that we do. Regularly advises us when there's any type of work that has to be done, not only in program support, in policy analysis as well. And having SAA director that is willing to promote the work of the SAC, and that way that message gets passed on to our governor's office and legislature, and we frequently get requests from both branches asking us give us the capsule summary of everything that you know about a particular type of tool. Tell us everything that you know of mentoring approach in violence prevention. So when a particular piece of legislation are being considered, particular types of policy directions considered by the governor's office, we are seen as a primary resource, and again, our versatility works in our favor. The first thought is, we don't know enough about this topic. Contact the Illinois Criminal Justice Information Authority, and that really means contacting the SAC, because we're the ones that are in the position of being able to summarize the existing knowledge in a particular topic area. And I'm fortunate enough to have fabulous staff capacity where I can say, look, we have one day to get this information back to the legislature or to the governor's office. They want to move on this by later today or tomorrow. And through a combination of things that we've been able to put together here, and through our ability to do web searches and knowing what all the national resources are for this types of information, we can produce these policy relevant and program relevant summaries very quickly.
Great.
Question?
That absolutely answers my question.
Okay.
And I do not see any other questions here. So, Mark, I want to thank you very much, as well as everyone who's on the phone who joined us today for the webinar. We hope you enjoyed the presentation. This is something we can follow up on for those of us who will be out in Breckenridge next month. If there's interest in this discussion, I certainly found it very interesting. Please join us for future webinars. And as I said earlier, check back for the presentation on the JRSA website in a few days. Again, for joining us, thank you, Mark, and everyone have a great afternoon.